The morning Clara Hutchins walked into Bowden's Hardware on the corner of 5th and Maple, she was not having a good day. She was not having a good week, if she was honest. She was not, if you pushed her a little harder, having a particularly good year. She was 41 years old, recently relocated from Chicago back to her hometown of Millhaven, Tennessee, and the ceiling fan in her spare bedroom had been flickering on and off for 3 days like it was sending a distress signal. Which, she thought to herself, felt appropriate. The bell above the door rang as she pushed inside. The store smelled like sawdust and motor oil and something faintly like her grandfather's garage. She hadn't been in a hardware store since Marcus used to drag her to one every other Sunday, back when they were still trying to build a life together instead of quietly dismantling one. She shook that thought loose. Light bulbs, she said to herself, scanning the aisles. Why did Clara really come back to Millhaven after 12 years? She told everyone it was the job. But the truth was something she hadn't told a single person. Aisle 3. She found them, LED bulbs, soft white, 60-watt equivalent. She stood there too long staring at the packaging because her brain had that foggy, overfull feeling it got when she was trying not to think about something. Like the boxes still stacked in the second bedroom. Like her mother's voice on the phone last week, "It's okay to come home, Clara. Coming home isn't giving up." She grabbed 2 packs of bulbs and turned around, and walked directly into a solid wall of a person. The bulbs hit the floor. She nearly followed. "Whoa, hey, I've got you." A hand caught her elbow, steady and sure. She looked up. A man stood there, maybe mid-40s, in a faded green flannel shirt, dark work pants, and boots that had clearly been broken in by actual work. His hair was going silver at the temples. He had the kind of face that had laughed a lot and weathered a few things, too. The lines around his eyes told both stories at once. "Sorry about that," he said, already crouching to pick up the bulbs from the floor. "I came around the corner too fast." "No, I wasn't, I was just standing there." Clara pressed a hand to her chest. "I wasn't paying attention." He handed the bulbs back to her. "You okay?" "Fine." "Yes. Thank you." She tucked her hair behind her ear, embarrassed. "I'm fine." He looked at her for a moment with calm, unhurried eyes, the way a person looks when they're not performing concern but actually feeling it. Then he nodded once. "All right," he said. And he stepped aside and let her pass. She didn't look back. She didn't look back. But something told her she should have. Something she wouldn't understand until much later. Clara paid for her bulbs, drove home, and replaced the flickering light. The fan stopped its distress signal. The house went quiet again. That night she sat on the back porch with a glass of sweet tea, a habit she'd forgotten she had until she moved back, and she listened to the crickets and felt, for the first time in months, like she might eventually be okay. She thought briefly about the man in the flannel shirt. Then she thought about the boxes in the second bedroom. Then she went inside and went to bed. Inside one of those boxes was something Clara had carried across 3 states and 2 decades. Something she had never opened since the day she packed it. And it was about to fall open on its own. The boxes remained untouched for another week. Clara threw herself into her new job, a grant writing position for a small nonprofit that supported rural schools across the county. It was quieter than her old marketing firm in Chicago. The salary was smaller. The commute was 3 minutes by car or 12 by foot. She took it by foot every morning. Millhaven had not changed much. That was the terrifying and comforting thing about it. The barber shop on 2nd Street still had the same striped pole. The diner, May's, still served the same biscuits and gravy. The Methodist church still rang its bell at 8 and noon and 6. The rhythm of the town felt like a heartbeat she'd been missing without knowing it. On her second Friday, she stopped at May's for coffee before work. The place was half full, booths occupied by familiar-faced strangers, people she sort of knew from 30 years ago, grown into different versions of themselves. She was staring into her mug when a voice said, "Hardware store, right?" She looked up. The man from the flannel shirt was standing by her booth holding a to-go cup, keys in his hand. Up close in daylight, she could see he had gray-green eyes and a small scar near his jaw, the kind that comes from something interesting. "Light bulbs," she said, before she'd thought about it. He smiled, "A real one." "That's right." He offered his hand. "Nate Bowden." She shook it. "Clara Hutchins." "You're Diane Hutchins' daughter," he said, not accusingly. "She talks about you." Clara blinked. "You know my mother?" "She comes into the store." "Everybody in Millhaven comes into the store eventually." He tilted his head. "Mind if I sit for a second? I've got 5 minutes before I need to open up." She should have said she was running late. She didn't. "Sure," she said. She didn't know yet that Nate Bowden had his own boxes. His own things he hadn't opened. His own reasons for staying in a small town when everything in him had once wanted to leave. She was about to find out, but not the way either of them expected. Nate sat across from her with the ease of a man comfortable in his own skin. He didn't fidget. He didn't fill silence with noise. He asked her how she was settling in, and he listened to her answer in a way that made her feel like it actually mattered. "What made you come back?" he asked. The honest answer was tangled up in too many things: her divorce, her burnout, her mother's knee surgery last fall, the moment she stood in her Chicago apartment at 2 in the morning and couldn't think of a single reason to stay. She gave him the short version. "My mom needed some help. And I needed a change." He nodded. "Those two things tend to find each other." "What about you?" she asked. "Did you grow up here?" "Born and raised. Left for a while, Army, then college, then a stint out west." He wrapped both hands around his cup. "Came back 12 years ago." "Why?" He looked out the window for a moment, something quiet crossing his face. "My dad got sick. I came back to help run the store." He paused. He passed 4 years later. By then it was just, mine. "Do you ever wish you'd stayed out west?" He thought about it honestly, the way some people did. "Some mornings," he said. "But not most." His radio crackled from his belt. He glanced at it, then stood. "That's my cue." He picked up his cup. "It was good to formally meet you, Clara Hutchins." "You too," she said. He walked out. She watched the door close. She sat there a little longer than she needed to, her coffee growing cool. Something had shifted, and Clara couldn't name it. She told herself it was just the comfort of familiar rhythms, of small-town kindness. But there was a question growing in the back of her mind that she wasn't ready to ask yet, not even to herself. She saw him again the following Tuesday. He was on a ladder outside the hardware store, replacing a light fixture above the entrance. She was walking to work. She lifted a hand. He lifted one back. That was all. On Thursday, her mother mentioned his name over dinner. "Nate Bowden fixed the fence post out back," her mother said, spooning out green beans. "Wouldn't let me pay him. Just said it was neighborly." Clara looked up. "He fixed your fence?" "Fixed it and painted it." Her mother shrugged. "That's just how he is. His father was the same way. People like that, you don't find everywhere." Clara said nothing, just moved the food around her plate. "He lost his wife, you know," her mother added, not looking up. 5 years ago. Cancer. They were high school sweethearts. Married 20 years. The table went quiet. "He never really dated after," her mother continued. His daughter says he just works and reads and tends his garden. She glanced up. Good man. Just a little locked up. Clara thought about his eyes across the diner table. The way he'd said some mornings when she asked if he wished he'd stayed away. The slight weight in those words that he hadn't elaborated on. Locked up. She understood that. Two people. Both carrying something heavy. Both pretending they weren't. But here is the thing about small towns, they don't let you pretend for very long. And something was about to happen that would make pretending impossible for both of them. The nonprofit where Clara worked, Roots and Reach, was small but scrappy. 3 full-time staff, a rotating roster of volunteers, and a mission to put functional libraries and tutoring programs into the rural schools that state funding had left behind. Her boss, a fiercely efficient woman named Patrice, dropped a fat folder on Clara's desk on a Wednesday morning. Grant proposal, Patrice said. State Arts and Education Fund. Deadline in 3 weeks. It's our biggest ask yet. We need new shelving units, reading furniture, and a full AV setup for 4 schools. $200,000. Clara opened the folder. Have we applied to this fund before? Twice. Denied both times. Patrice crossed her arms. The feedback was that our budget line for materials wasn't specific enough. We need vendor quotes, itemized and real. Clara looked at the list of materials. Shelving. Lumber. Hardware. She already knew where she was going. She didn't go to Bowden's Hardware just for vendor quotes. She knew that. She admitted it to herself on the walk over, which was either progress or a problem. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known yet, was what she was about to find inside that store that would change the shape of everything. The bell rang above the door. Nate was at the counter going over invoices. He looked up when she walked in, and something in his face settled, the way a room does when someone opens a window. Clara. I need your professional help, she said. Official capacity. He set his pen down. All right. She explained the project, the grant, the schools, the shelving, the need for itemized quotes on materials. He listened without interrupting, the way she was learning he always did. How many schools? He asked. 4. Different sizes. He picked up a notepad. Walk me through what each one needs. They spent an hour at the counter, side by side, going through the list. He knew his inventory with quiet confidence, dimensions, load ratings, installation costs, lead times. He was thorough without being showy about it. He asked smart questions. When she mentioned one school had a smaller budget allocated for finishing materials, he said, without hesitation, I can work with that. There are good options that don't look cheap. When they finished, he looked over the totals he'd written out. I'll type these up properly and email them to you by end of day. Formal letterhead, the whole thing. You don't have to do it today. You've got a deadline, he said simply. She nodded, gathering her things. Then she noticed something on the shelf behind the counter. A small watercolor painting, framed in plain wood, of a cardinal sitting on a bare winter branch. It was quietly beautiful. That's lovely, she said, before she could stop herself. Nate glanced at it. Something passed over his face. My daughter painted it, he said after a moment. She's 14. She painted it for me last Christmas. She's talented. He looked at the painting for another second. Yeah, he said softly. She is. Clara left. The quote was in her email inbox by 3 p.m. Nate hadn't told her the whole story about that painting. He hadn't told anyone. And that painting, that small, quiet watercolor, was connected to something that had been sitting in the locked-up part of his chest for 5 years. A truth his daughter had somehow painted without knowing it. The grant proposal came together over the next 2 weeks. Clara worked late most nights, her dining room table covered in research, drafts, budget spreadsheets. Her mother brought her tea and didn't ask too many questions, which was its own kind of love. On the second to last night before the deadline, Clara found herself stuck on the narrative section, the part that explained why these libraries mattered, not just what they'd cost. She had written it 3 times and each version felt correct but bloodless. She walked outside onto the porch. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Nate Bowden, got your contact from Patrice at Roots and Reach. Just saw the grant doc she shared. If it helps, I went to one of those schools. Ridge County Elementary. Didn't have a library. Just a cart that came around on Fridays." She stared at the text. Then she typed back, "What did books do for you?" A pause. Then, "Kept me company when things were loud at home. Made me feel like the world was bigger than it looked from where I was standing." Clara read it twice. Then she went inside and rewrote the narrative section in 40 minutes. It was the best writing she'd done in years. She sent it off at 11:48 p.m. Then she typed one more text, "Thank you. That was exactly what I needed." His reply came at midnight, "Glad it helped. Get some sleep." She did. For the first time in a long time, she actually did. What Nate had written was true. But it was only part of the truth. The part he left out was the part that had shaped every quiet kindness he had ever done since, and it was connected, in ways neither of them knew yet, directly to Clara's past. 3 weeks later, Roots and Reach got the grant. All $200,000. Patrice called Clara at 7 in the morning, practically shouting. Clara sat on the edge of her bed laughing in a way that surprised her, full and unguarded, the kind of laugh that lives somewhere beneath caution. She texted Nate. "We got it." He replied in 2 seconds, "Of course you did." She laughed again. That afternoon, Patrice insisted on a small celebration at May's, the staff, a few board members, and whoever else could make it on short notice. Clara walked in to find the corner booth already filling up. And there, near the end of the table, was Nate, hands around a coffee cup, looking slightly like he'd been ambushed. "Patrice called me," he said when Clara slid into the seat across from him. "She calls everyone," Clara said. He smiled. "She's terrifying. She's wonderful." "Same thing," he said. They ate pie and drank too much coffee and somehow, over the course of 2 hours, the table cleared around them and they were the last 2 sitting. Neither of them moved. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said. "Sure. Why did you volunteer the information about your school? You didn't have to. You didn't even know me." He looked at his cup for a moment. "Patrice talks about the work. I've heard about it for a while. When I saw the proposal, I thought about Ridge County." He paused. "I thought about a kid I used to be." "What was happening at home?" she asked quietly. "You said things were loud." He looked up. His eyes were steady, not defensive, just honest. "My dad drank back then. Not meanly. Just heavily. The store was struggling and he didn't know another way to carry it. A beat. Books were the one thing that were just mine. Nobody drinking at books. Nobody yelling at books." Clara held that. "I got my father's store," he said. "He got sober when I was in my 20s. We had good years together before he passed." His voice was even. "But I've always believed in what books do for kids who need something to be theirs. So the quotes you gave us," she said slowly. "You gave us contractor pricing." He shrugged one shoulder. "I know what those rooms need to look like. I didn't want cost to be the thing that made them fall short." Clara felt something in her chest shift. She recognized the feeling, It was the same thing she'd felt the night she rewrote that narrative section, when the right words finally came and she knew they were true. "Nate," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you. For all of it." He nodded once. Looked away. Looked back. "You're welcome, Clara." There was something neither of them had said. Something that had been building since the hardware store, since the light bulbs on the floor, since the text at midnight. And it was sitting right there in the diner booth between them, patient and quiet and waiting. But before it could be said, something happened that changed everything. Something that came from the second bedroom. From the box Clara had never opened. That night Clara went home and stood in the doorway of the second bedroom for a long time. Her mother was asleep. Buster, a stray tabby cat she had inherited from a neighbor in Chicago, watched her from the top of the dresser with yellow eyes. She walked to the stack in the corner. For boxes, taped and labeled in her own handwriting from over a year ago. Books/miscellaneous kitchen things. Files, office. Miscellaneous. She knelt in front of the last one. She had told herself it stood for extra. She had known the whole time it didn't. It stood for Emmett. Her brother. Younger by 3 years. Funny in the way that quiet people are funny, precise, unexpected, perfectly timed. He had died 11 years ago. Car accident on an icy highway in January. He was 29. She had never fully unpacked after. Not emotionally. Not literally. She peeled the tape back. Inside, his college sweatshirt. A stack of letters they'd written each other during the years she lived abroad. A disposable camera she'd never developed because she couldn't bear to see what was on it. His beat-up copy of The Old Man and the Sea. And at the very bottom, a folded piece of notebook paper. She unfolded it. It was in Emmett's handwriting. At the top, "Things I want to tell Clara when she comes home for Christmas." Her throat closed. It was a list. 14 items. Some funny, ask her why she still pronounces crayon wrong. Some ordinary, show her the new trail by the reservoir. And at the very bottom, the last one, in slightly heavier ink, like he'd pressed harder. Tell her that she deserves someone who shows up. Not just when it's easy. Someone who actually shows up. Clara sat on the floor of the second bedroom for a long time. She didn't cry at first. Then she did. Then she picked up her phone and she called Nate Bowden. Not because she had a plan. Not because she knew what she was going to say. She called because Emmett had told her to, 11 years late. And because she was tired of carrying things alone. He answered on the second ring. "Clara? I need to tell you something," she said, her voice still unsteady. "I don't entirely know how to say it." "That's okay," he said. "I've got time. Take it slow." She exhaled. And she began. She told him about Emmett. She told him about the box and the letter and the 14 things on the list. She told him that she'd spent 11 years building a life that looked successful from the outside and felt hollow from the inside because she had never properly grieved the person who knew her best. She talked for a long time. Nate didn't interrupt once. When she finished, he said, "He sounds like someone worth missing." And somehow that was exactly right. 3 days later, she had the disposable camera developed. The photos were from Christmas, 11 years ago. Emmett laughing at the table. Her mother in the kitchen. Clara, younger, lighter, not yet carrying all of it, squinting into the sun on the front porch. She framed one. She put it on the dresser in the second bedroom. Then she unpacked the rest of the boxes. All of them. She was done waiting. The connection Nate hadn't spoken of, the part of his story that lived underneath the words, came out slowly, the way true things do when you've stopped being afraid of them. He told her, 2 weeks later on a walk along the reservoir trail, that when his wife was sick, she had made him promise something. "Keep showing up for people," she'd said. "Even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient." And so he had. The fence posts. The contractor pricing. The text at midnight. None of it was strategy. All of it was a promise kept. Clara understood then that Nate hadn't been locked up, as her mother had said. He had simply been faithful, to a woman he loved, to a promise he made, to a way of being in the world that cost him something and he paid anyway. That was not locked up. That was the most open a person could be. The painting on the shelf behind the counter, the cardinal on the winter branch, had been painted by his daughter, Lily, on a December afternoon the year after her mother died. Nate had come home from work to find it propped against his coffee mug at the kitchen table. No note. Just the painting. He'd asked Lily later what made her paint it. She'd shrugged. "Cardinals are supposed to be the people you loved, visiting you. I thought maybe if I painted one, it would stay." He hadn't been able to say anything. He'd just pulled her in and held her there for a long time. He told Clara this on a Sunday morning on the porch of his house, Lily inside making pancakes, the kind of morning that felt too gentle to be real. Clara listened and felt Emmett in the room somehow, warm and clear, the way he always was. What Clara had gone to Bowden's Hardware for was vendor quotes. What she found, in the slow, ordinary, undramatic way that real things are found, was someone who made her feel like showing up to her own life again. That was the change she hadn't known to ask for. That was what the store had given her. She didn't have a word for what Nate was to her then, and she didn't need one. She only knew that when she walked into that store, the fog that had followed her from Chicago started thinning at the edges. And that felt like enough to begin with. Small towns do not let you pretend for long. This is their gift and their inconvenience. Within 6 months of Clara's return to Millhaven, she had become part of its rhythm: morning walks, maize on Fridays, grant proposals on weekday nights, Sunday dinners with her mother. And Nate became part of that rhythm, too, gradually and without announcement. Lily started texting Clara about books. Clara started showing up at the hardware store, not always for hardware. Her mother stopped mentioning Nate's name like a suggestion and started setting an extra plate at dinner like a fact. Nobody made a speech about it. Nobody had to. The question Clara had been afraid to ask herself, the one growing quietly in the back of her mind since the diner, was simply this: am I allowed to want this? Am I allowed to want something gentle and honest and permanent, after everything that fell apart before? The answer, she found, was yes. It was always yes. She had simply needed time to believe it. Nate never pushed for more than she was ready to give. And that patience was the thing that finally made her feel safe enough to give everything. Nate's boxes were different from Clara's. His weren't in a second bedroom. They were in the way he sometimes went still in the middle of a sentence, looking somewhere past the present. In the way he kept the hardware store exactly as his father had left it, right down to the hand-lettered signs his dad had made in the 1980s. In the way he said some mornings when she asked if he wished he'd stayed away, acknowledging the longing without surrendering to it. When Clara finally understood that, she stopped thinking of him as someone who had stayed put. She started thinking of him as someone who had chosen to stay, which is a different thing entirely, and a much braver one. The box marked E, miscellaneous, was the last thing Clara had carried from her life in Chicago that she hadn't been able to face. Opening it did not fix everything. That is not how grief works, and anyone who tells you otherwise has not loved someone the way Clara loved Emmett. But it changed something. It let a little light back in. It reminded her that carrying something is not the same as honoring it. Sometimes honoring something means setting it down gently and letting yourself walk forward. The sweatshirt lived on the back of the chair in the second bedroom, which was no longer the room where the boxes lived. It was a reading room now, with a small lamp and a shelf of books and a framed photo of Emmett on the dresser. She should have looked back in the hardware store, on that first day, when the bulbs fell and the stranger with the gray-green eyes handed them back to her. She didn't. But she came back. That's what mattered. She always came back. And eventually she stopped having to come back because she had stopped leaving in the first place. Clara had come back to Millhaven, she told her mother one evening on the porch, because she was looking for a version of herself she had misplaced somewhere between her ambitions and her losses. She had thought she might find it in familiar streets and her mother's kitchen and the sound of the church bell. She had not expected to find it in a hardware store. She had not expected to find it in a man who fixed fences without asking for credit, and told a stranger at midnight that he'd once needed books to make the world feel bigger. She had not expected any of it. But she had found it. Herself, quieter, truer, unafraid of ordinary mornings. And that was what she had really come home for. She walked into a small-town hardware store to buy a light bulb. She walked out, not that first day, but eventually, in all the ways that count, with something she hadn't been looking for in 12 years. Not romance, exactly. Not rescue. Just the feeling that she was not too far gone. That the life she wanted was still possible. That love, when it came in quiet flannel shirts and contractor pricing and midnight texts and boxes finally opened, that kind of love was worth every year it took to find. She hadn't known that when she walked in. She knew it now. 1 year after the grant was awarded, for school libraries in Millhaven's rural county opened their doors. New shelves, warm lighting, reading corners with soft chairs. Hundreds of children walked in and looked around with wide eyes. At Ridge County Elementary, a 7th grader named Maya sat down with a book for the first time in a library that felt like it had been built for her. She didn't know that the man who'd donated the shelving it cost was the same man who'd sat in this building 40 years ago wishing for exactly what she now had. She just knew it felt like somewhere she belonged. Nate stood outside afterward, watching through the window. Clara came to stand beside him, her shoulder warm against his. "You're thinking about the Friday book cart," she said. He nodded. She slipped her hand into his. He held it. No announcements. No photographs. Just two people who had both been a little broken, standing together in the pale winter sun, watching a girl discover that the world was bigger than it looked from where she was standing. Which, as it turned out, was all either of them had ever needed.